So in today's module, I'm going to be talking about how to find contractors who are going to do all of the service fulfillment for you. So that way you don't actually have to do any client work yourself. So this way you can outsource all of the service delivery side of the agency and all of that without ever having to pay anything out of pocket. Now I call this drop servicing. It allows you to get your services fulfilled by an experienced contractor without you actually ever having to hire them in a traditional sense, which means there is no established employment relationship here, so there is no risk when it comes to hiring. You don't have to commit to paying them a fixed salary every month. You can stop working with them whenever you feel like it, and you only pay this contractor once you have already gotten paid by clients, and you don't even have to have a contract in place if you don't want to. It's very different than hiring employees in a traditional sense. It's really a superior way of running a business. And the reason I call this drop servicing is because it follows the same principles of drop shipping, but applied to a service-based business instead of a product-based business. Now that principle is arbitrage. And let me explain what I mean. The way that the drop shipping model works is by buying products in certain parts of the world for however many dollars, and then selling them for 5, 10, 20 times more in other parts of the world. Quite simply, it is a price arbitrage. And most importantly, with drop shipping, you only pay for the cost of goods once your customer has already paid you. So you never have to pay anything out of pocket, which is exactly why drop shipping is such an attractive business model for beginners. Now, the thing is, you can actually take advantage of this exact same concept for your own service-based business or your agency more specifically. How? Well, it's rather simple. If you go to countries like US, UK, Canada, Australia, even most of Western Europe, you will find businesses paying thousands of dollars a month to get services delivered for them. And at the same time, if you go to countries like Colombia, Brazil, Serbia, South Africa, Slovakia, pretty much South American and Eastern European countries, you are going to be able to find professionals delivering these same services for just a few $100s a month per client that you bring them. Then all you have to do is connect the two sides under your agency umbrella, and you basically pocket the difference. So in this case, you're arbitraging the price of the services. And if you just think about any big service-based business, that's exactly how they operate. Even the multi-billion-dollar consulting firms, they do the exact same thing, whether that be the consulting firms or even law firms. They hire someone for a set amount, and then they sell their time for 5, 10, 20x that price in the form of client projects or retainers or client billables. So we're taking advantage of the same concept that these 9-figure and even billion-dollar firms, the same concept that they use, but just to a greater extent, and we do it from a digital perspective. Why? Because first of all, most service-based business are bound to a location. So they actually have to hire locally and can't benefit from this arbitrage play that we use when we're hiring from across the world. And by the way, just because these contractors are cheaper than getting someone in the US or the UK, that doesn't mean the quality of their service is subpar. In my experience, it's quite the opposite, in fact. Most of them are experienced professionals and know exactly what they are doing to a T. And they are still way cheaper than trying to hire graduates with no experience that have huge student debts fresh out of any US or UK university. And second, and most importantly, we structure all of our deals in a way that our client pays us upfront. So they pay us before we ever do any work. And that's very normal when you're working with an agency. And then we only pay our contractors once the work has been fulfilled. Meaning you will only ever need to pay your contractors once your clients have already paid you. And since we keep our deals project-based, in case you lose any clients, they won't be paid for that specific client project anymore. You lose the client, you inform the contractor, we're not working with them anymore, so your services will not be needed for this specific client. And the real beauty of working with contractors is the flexibility that it brings you. It allows you to offer different types of services or just to completely shift your service altogether without ever having to learn a new skill from scratch, which is usually where majority of the time is spent. This way, you can skip the entire learning curve and take the pressure off your shoulders when it comes to having to provide results for your clients yourself, and instead have an experienced professional taking care of that for you, so that way you can focus on what matters the most when it comes to growing your agency, which is signing new clients. So now let's get into where to find these contractors, how to approach them, how to structure your deals, and how to make sure they deliver good quality work. Now, before we get into that, I have a very important word of warning here. Just because you are outsourcing the fulfillment of your services, that doesn't mean that you don't need to study your industry and understand how the process of delivering your services works. The better you understand how your service and industry work, the better you will be at selling such services to potential clients, and the better you'll be at managing the contractors that you hire, which are both crucial aspects to the success of your agency. So let's discuss the best place to find contractors. Finding contractors is actually a very, very similar process to outreaching to potential clients, because the concept is essentially the same. You are going to start off by finding a place with potential leads. Now, that could be straight from Upwork, that could be Facebook groups, that could be LinkedIn, wherever your ideal contractor hangs out. And then you basically compile a list of them. And there's two different ways to approach compiling that list, which I'm gonna cover in just a minute. And so far, this is the exact same approach we use for client outreach. Now, once you have a list of potential candidates, that's when the approach changes a little bit. What you're gonna wanna do is run them through an assignment, or simply put, basically a few tasks to judge how qualified they are. And I'm gonna cover this in detail shortly. And then from there, you just jump on an interview with the most qualified candidates and select your top pick. So it's basically a 5-step process. The first being find a place with potential candidates, and then you're gonna compile a list of candidates. The third is you're gonna send them an assignment, and then the fourth is you're gonna interview the top candidates. And finally, select your final pick. Now, what I want you to focus on is the first step, which is finding a place with potential candidates. And finding the right place is quite literally the difference between having world-class candidates applying to work with you versus having candidates with very little experience. So, to start with, the easiest place to find good quality contractors is Upwork. There's literally thousands of them on there for every single online service that you can imagine. And I always recommend this being one of the places you build your list from, but not the only one. And that's due to the fact that there is very high demand for these contractors. And you'll notice that the prices that you pay there are going to be a little higher than other places, but it's a good place to look nonetheless. Now, here's how I usually find the best hidden gems for the best prices. So you got to start thinking, what are the types of softwares or tools that my ideal candidate would be using? So I'll give you a few examples here. A large portion of the agencies inside of our programs are paid traffic agencies that run Facebook or Google ads for clients. So what type of software would the ideal candidate for that position be using? So in this case, you think of a software like Hyros, which is a tracking software, or Magic X, which is an automation software for Facebook ads. If someone is good at running ads, then more than likely they're going to be using one of those. I mean, really no questions about it. So where do all of these people hang out? Well, it turns out that most software or online tools have forums or discussions. Usually it's either a Facebook group or a dedicated forum on their website. And everyone who hangs out in these forums will be, by default, a wildly qualified prospect for your position. So just think about it. You need a designer? Well, you can look on Dribbble, which is a portfolio sharing platform for designers. But you can also look on the forums for Webflow, which is one of the most popular website builders out there. If someone is actively posting on the forum for that tool, well, then they're probably going to be a good candidate for our position. Same for video editors. Think about the softwares they use: Adobe Premiere, DaVinci Resolve. Or if you want to take it a step further, you can think about what online courses a good candidate for that position would be taking, because most online courses also have a community with them. And this is another place where you can find these potential candidates. Again, 80% of the work here is being strategic on how you approach finding the right candidates in the first place. I'm telling you right now, there's so many free or paid groups related to softwares and tools that your ideal candidate would be using on a day-to-day basis. Or as I said, there's a $7 a month or $20 a month or $30 a month paid communities that specifically revolve on becoming a better video editor, becoming a better short form editor, becoming a better media buyer. So if someone is spending $10, $20, $30 a month to be in these paid communities, then more than likely they're a person that is good at what they do and they take what they do very seriously. Then the last option is LinkedIn, since it's a platform that's literally built to connect employers to potential employees and vice versa. So there you can search and filter professionals based on their experience, skills, etc. Now, the way that you approach contacting those potential candidates on LinkedIn is slightly different than you would on Upwork or a particular forum. And this takes us directly to our next point, which is compiling a list of potential candidates. You now know exactly where your potential candidates hang out. So, how do you get them to apply to work with you? Well, here's where we have two potential approaches, and that applies to all of our marketing in general. There's outbound and there's inbound. Outbound is when you manually reach out to people first without them ever requesting to contact you. That is a cold contact approach. Now, inbound is when people request to be contacted by you or they just contact you directly. So basically the first effort in the interaction comes from them. So in that example, think about you calling a restaurant for reservations. That is an inbound contact because you initiated the interaction. Or think about someone trying to call you to sell you on an internet or mobile plan. Once again, that is outbound because they initiated the interaction first. So in our hiring scenario here, an outbound contact would be when you find someone on LinkedIn and then you send them a direct message. For example, an inbound contact would be posting a job on a Facebook group or inside Upwork and then getting candidates applying to work with you because they are the ones who are actively initiating the interaction. Now, the thing you have to understand here is there is a big difference in the power dynamics between these two interactions, because when you're approaching someone outbound, you're initiating the conversation. You are the one who's chasing a response, which by default means the person being chased is kind of the one who's in control of the interaction. So basically they're the one in a position of power because after all, you are the one going to talk to them. They never asked to talk to you in the first place. On the other hand, an inbound interaction means that the person contacted you. They are the ones chasing a response. So, opposite to the outbound example, you are the one who has control over the interaction, and you are the one with the most power or authority here. And that's very important to understand because it plays a direct role in how committed these candidates are going to be, which will dictate how much they're willing to negotiate their prices and even how invested they will be in getting your clients great results. So obviously with the inbound approach, where they're chasing you and applying to work with your agency, you are the one in control of the dynamic. So that is where you're going to get the most committed candidates. Whereas with the outbound approach, you are the one messaging them. So that means that they are the ones in the position of power. You're not going to get as committed candidates through outbound contacts. So that's why for me personally, I always prefer to go with inbound. Now, there is also a negative side to the inbound approach. You're always going to be limited to the amount of people that you can reach through your posts. Let's say you have your job post inside of a Facebook group. You are going to be limited by the amount of people who saw that post and decided to click on your job application. And that's obviously only going to be a small percentage of the total number of members in the group. Now with outbound, you could just send all of the members a message. This way, making sure that even the people who did not see your posts are aware of the opportunity that you're presenting. It's way more work and the candidates are not going to be as committed, but you're not limited by reach with this approach. So how do you decide between the two? Well, my recommendation to you is to implement a mixed approach. Have your job post on forums, communities, Upwork, etc., but also take the time to find potential candidates who you judge would be a good fit for this job role and reach out to them manually. Because to be honest, the best, the top of the top talent doesn't usually apply to job posts, so you have to manually reach out to them. Now, let me give you an example of the exact type of message you should send for the outbound approach, as well as what type of posts that you can use for the inbound approach. So for both approaches, your goal is to send them to an application page, which I'm going to show you exactly how to put together in the next step. Now, for the outbound approach, you want to have a message along the lines of this. Hey, whatever their name is, I'm reaching out regarding a job role opportunity at, insert your name, a newly founded agency, then obviously just input your industry or space. I read through your past work experience and I believe that this is something you will potentially be a good fit for. The compensation is project-based, So the more client accounts you get attributed to, the more you get paid, meaning that there's a lot of growth potential. We currently have a hiring application open for Put In Job Role. If you want to check it out, insert link. Is that a position you'd be interested in applying for? This application is open for the next 3 days. Please let me know if you have any questions about it. And that's it. That accomplishes everything you need to do here inside of a cold message, which is tells people why you're reaching out, tells them who you are, tells them why this is relevant to them, tells them that there's a potential financial gain, adds urgency at the end, and has a direct call to action. And I'd make sure not to add too much other than that. Otherwise, the message is going to get too long. Now, for the inbound approach, you want to have a job post that follows this structure. Are you an experienced insert job role looking to grow your client portfolio? If so, you might be interested in this. Insert your agency name. A newly founded agency in the insert your industry has just opened a few positions on our new insert job role department. The compensation is project-based, so the more client accounts you get attributed to, the more you get paid, meaning there's a lot of growth potential. Now, we currently have a hiring application for insert job role. If you want to check it out, insert link. If you want to land an important role with a lot of growth potential at an early stage startup, this is the opportunity for you. P.S. This application is open for the next 3 days only. So pretty much same idea, just adapted to an outbound scenario instead. Now, specifically for Facebook groups and similar communities, this type of post will perform well. And I'd recommend pairing it with an attention-grabbing image for any social media network post. For platforms like Upwork, where the reason people are on such platform in the first place is to actually look for opportunities and look for jobs, you can actually afford to have a bit of a longer job post. So you can basically just add a longer description of the job role, expectations, etc. But definitely don't do that inside of Facebook groups because people won't read the entire thing. Also, just a heads up for Upwork, you won't be able to link people to a hiring application, so you'll have to ask them the questions directly through the platform. But the idea behind the application process is the same. Now, once you have your candidates clicking on your job post or outbound message, you now need to take them to an application page. And I recommend keeping this one fairly simple. To build this out, you can use Google Forms as a free option, or you can use Typeform as a paid option if you want to just make it look a little more fancy. On the form itself, I'd recommend not having too many questions because the more questions it takes to apply, the more effort required from the candidate. And obviously, the more effort that's required, the fewer applications you're going to get. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the idea here is to send these candidates an assignment so that way you can judge their skills based on it. However, what I figured out after running literally hundreds of rounds of hiring processes is that if you give them an assignment straight away, you're going to reduce the amount of applicants that you get significantly. And when I say significantly, I mean you will literally reduce by 10 times the amount of applicants that you get just by giving them an assignment on the first step of the application. We've made that mistake in the past, trust me. So what I figured out after testing and experimenting probably more than any other online company out there is that the ideal flow for this application process is to first ask them some very simple questions, such as their experience, why they're interested in this position, why they judge themselves as a good fit for it. And then based on that, you can already disqualify the bulk of candidates and only focus on the good quality ones. And then what you want to do is you want to send them an email letting them know that their answers sparked your interest and that they've been selected for the second stage of your hiring process. And then here's where you send them the assignments. This way, you're not only going to be talking to just the qualified applicants, which is going to save you a lot of time from going through a bunch of mediocre assignments, but also the applicants who got selected to the second stage are now going to be way more invested in this hiring process because they already did well in the first stage and they have a real chance of getting the position. So they're going to want to show you their best work instead of just throwing something together for a random online application process that they don't even know if they'll get a response from, which is what usually happens when you have assignments on the first stage of this process. So let me show you what a few of my application processes look like for my own company. Now, something else that I want to highlight here is that I don't ever ask for, I don't ever look at CVs. CVs are completely generic. They don't provide you with any real examples of work, and they don't allow you to judge how skilled someone is. Quite frankly, they're quite literally useless. So I don't even recommend asking for them. Now, finally, after going through the second stage of the process, you will be able to select the top candidates skill-wise. Now, the main outcome I'm looking for during the second stage is to identify the top 3 to 5 candidates. And usually at this point, they're all going to look very similar skill set wise. So really what I need to figure out next is just who's the best culture fit? Who do I connect with the best? And who is most likely to be someone who's committed, hardworking, and who will stick around for a long time. What I want to avoid the most is someone who's going to be hired, stick around for 2 to 3 months, and then just leave, because that will be a big time waster for your company in general. So at this point, I just hop into a call with every single candidate and ask them a few questions. Once again, at this point, you already know that they're good skill set wise. So mostly what I talk about here is life situation. What's their life like? Do they have a wife? Do they have any kids? Are they more like the stay-at-home type of individual, or do they like to go out a lot and always be moving? What are their past experiences? How long have they been working at their current job? Or if they're a freelancer, how many clients are they currently working with? And how long do the clients usually stay with them? What's their longest standing client? All of those questions will give you an insight into their personality and what it's like working with them. In my personal experience, someone who is always partying and always traveling to different places is less reliable. So I definitely take that into consideration. Now, someone who has a girlfriend or a wife and mostly stays at home at their desk is way more likely to be someone who's reliable. And based on their past work experiences, I can judge if there's someone who tends to stick around, or if they have a tendency to bounce around between different jobs, or if they always have just a bunch of different clients on rotation. Ideally, I want someone who tends to not change jobs too often. Or if they work with clients, someone who tends to work with clients for long periods of time and not just a month or two. Ideally, years. Most importantly, I try to figure out what's their current situation right now and where are they looking to get to. That way, I can judge if it makes sense for them to actually take on this position and if it's something that aligns with their long-term goals. Because if it's not, the likelihood of them churning out is very high. I also personally tend to avoid candidates who say things along the lines of, yeah, I'm mainly looking to get experience here and then start my own thing. If you're looking for someone to just complete a specific demand or maybe work on 1 or 2 specific projects, this is totally fine. Now, if you're looking for a long-term partnership, this is a big no-no. The last thing you want is someone who joins your agency. You take your time to onboard them. They get to know the clients and get up to speed with all of your processes, all of which does require you to invest quite a bit of time into them. And then after 2 or 3 months, they just leave. Because now you're gonna have to go through this entire process again with someone else. Again, this conversation is a bit more of a subjective one to judge, but here I would just say trust your gut. As you go through more of these, you'll start to develop a sense of who are the ideal candidates and who aren't. What you should definitely have in mind here is that what you're looking for is a long-term partnership. At first, the contractor is going to start working with you part-time on just a few clients, while most likely still managing a few other clients on the side. And that's totally fine, by the way, especially when you're first starting out. Now, ideally, your outcome should be to get enough clients to be able to afford this contractor full-time and evolve your relationship from owner to freelancer to more of a committed employee-like relationship, where they're still gonna get paid based on how much work they do or how many clients they take care of. So that way you have no risk of running into any cash flow issues, but now working with you full time and having no other clients on the side. And when you get to this point, you'll really start getting people who are committed to the success of your agency as well as your long-term vision. Then, once you get to a point where you have enough clients and cash flow coming in consistently every single month, that is when you can take this relationship another step further and offer the contractor a base salary regardless of how many clients that they're servicing. That way, you're providing them with way more financial security, and they usually really appreciate that, which then translates into even more commitment. That is the exact same process I went through with my first contractor back when I was starting my advertising agency. I started working with a contractor from Colombia. First, he was just taking care of a few clients I had while still working with other clients on the side. And then once I had enough clients, he dropped all of his other side gigs and started working with me full time. But I'd still pay him a certain amount per client he was taking care of. And then finally, I got to a point where I had so much consistent cash flow coming in that I offered him a base salary plus performance deal. Eventually, this contractor went on to become the CMO of my marketing agency. All of that to say that even though you can start small, paying just a few $100s a month to work with a contractor for each client that they're servicing, always approach this with a long-term mentality, because this one contractor can eventually become a key employee in your agency in the future. Now, here's how to structure your deals with contractors. Again, this will vary drastically depending on which type of service that you're delivering. But when you are first starting out, what you want to do is to pay them based on deliverables. So if you're working with a video editor, let's say, you want to pay them a set amount of money every single video that they deliver. And that amount will vary depending on how much your clients are paying you. Remember, all we're doing here is arbitraging value between how much the client pays you and how much you pay for the contractors. So let's say your average client pays you $3,000 a month to edit 5 long form videos for YouTube per month, which by the way, many businesses will do. You know, some small beginner YouTuber is not going to pay you $3,000 for 5 videos, but actual corporate companies, like actual real businesses, for them to spend $3,000 to get 5 videos, and comparing that to the results that they could get spending $3,000 on ads, which many businesses easily spend that a week or sometimes even a day or sometimes even before lunch. So in this instance, it makes sense for you to pay your contractor $100 or maybe even more, but let's say $100 per video delivered. This way, they're making $500 per client that he works with you on. So it doesn't look like that much at first, but once you get to 4 or 5 clients, you can already afford to be working with this individual full time, since they'll be making $2,000 to $2,500 a month, which is a very good starting point as a video editor. Now, this can vary a lot. I've gotten contractors for video editing working full time for as low as $750 a month in the past. Now, obviously, that's a very, very low starting point, but I'm just giving you an example to show you how affordable this is. In my short form agency, we currently have around 30 editors working full time, and we pay them on average from $1,500 to $3,000 a month, depending on their skill level. Now, for other services, the concept is very similar. For media buying, for example, a very common practice is to pay contractors around $500 per month per client. And for the same client, you can charge $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, upwards of $10,000. You know, I had an example where with my contractor, he was charging me, I think at that point, $500, or maybe for that specific client, it was a little more, $800 per month for that client. And it was my first ever 5-figure a month client. I was charging that client more than 5 figures a month. Now, I will say that was sort of the client that basically made me realize this is stupid. I should just hire him full time at this point. I had more than enough budget too, so because of that client, I ended up hiring him full time. But nonetheless, I still did manage to do an arbitrage play of charging the client over $10,000, and the contractor was only charging me normally per month. It was $500 per month per client. But in that specific example, I remember he ended up charging a little more. So you just have to work with the numbers and figure out what makes sense for your specific scenario based on how much your average client pays you. Now, ideally, you want to keep your agency at 60 to 80% profit margins, so you can work your numbers based on these figures. If your client pays you X, ideally, you should be paying your contractor from 20 to 40% of that. Now, in the beginning, it's natural that your margins are going to be lower because you'll have lower paying clients, and you can only go so low on how much you're willing to pay the contractors. But as you start growing the size of your client retainers, the 60 to 80% profit margin should be where you aim for. Now, a lot of students get confused as to whether you should get your contractors in direct contact with your clients, and if you should add them to the same channel inside of Flowsy or Slack or whatever tool you're using for client communication, and if they should be in client meetings. Now, I'll be honest, that's really up to you. I know a lot of people here get concerned with the potential threat of the contractor getting too close to the client and then trying to steal the client, if you will. But if you do a good job at screening their character and how committed they are to you during the hiring process, well then honestly, that shouldn't really be a concern of yours. If that happens, it means you should have done a better job at hiring. To be honest, it's the same thing with a girlfriend or boyfriend, for example. If you're constantly worried about them not talking or being in the presence of the opposite sex because you're afraid they're gonna cheat on you, well then you probably should have done a better job at screening their character before getting into a relationship with them. Because quite frankly, you want to be in a relationship with someone, even when given the opportunity to cheat on you or get with someone else, they would decline it 100% of the time. It's the exact same with your contractors and your employees. Now, obviously, if someone offers an employee of yours 5 times their salary, well, then that's a different conversation. But you want someone who would at least bring that up to you and get into a conversation with you before making any decisions. Basically giving you the option to make a counter offer and see what's the best way to move forward for both parties. So I guess all of that to say that no, you shouldn't be afraid of getting your contractor in contact with your clients. I would highly recommend having them in the same Flowsy or Slack channel with the client, or the same WhatsApp group, whatever form of communication you decide to use. So that way, if there's anything urgent that they need to communicate with the client or vice versa, it doesn't need to pass through you first. That's also going to take a lot off of your plate. And ideally, you should be involved as little as possible in the service delivery side of things. So definitely I lean towards having them on the communication channels with your clients. And a few people get confused here on how they should present this contractor to the client and basically how to explain your relationship with the contractor. And here, all you have to do is tell the client that this contractor is a part of your team. You never refer to them as a contractor. You always refer to them as if they're a full-time employee, even if they're currently only working part-time with you. So I never said that, oh, they were a full-time employee or this is my employee, because I didn't want to blatantly lie. So I would always just say that they're a part of my team, which is the truth. If they're a contractor, if they're part-time, if they're still a part of your team. But the cardinal sin is never, ever, ever refer to them as a contractor. Now, another big question is, should you have your contractors on calls with clients? And I'd say that one is really up for discussion. In my opinion, it makes sense to have them there so that way they can give and receive direct feedback from the client. But it's very important that they know how to present themselves properly and in a professional manner, because they represent your company. And if they come across as unprofessional or unexperienced, that will be reflected onto you as an agency. So in situations where they are not very fluent in their language, for example, well, that's where you should potentially consider not having them on calls, because to be honest, it could be a bad look for you as an agency. But ideally, they know how to present themselves well. They have a simple but professional looking camera setup. They dress appropriately, as well as they're capable of communicating in a professional manner with clients. Now, once you have the right contractors in place, how do you actually manage your relationships with them? How often do you communicate? And how do you ensure that they are delivering good quality work? Well, when it comes to communication, I like to keep the same approach here. You should consider your contractor as a part of your team. So if you have weekly calls with your team, they should be on those weekly calls. If you have 2 calls a week with your team, they should be on those 2 calls. If you have a daily call, then they should be there. Now, just consider that when you're first starting out working with a contractor, and let's say they're really only fulfilling 1 or 2 clients, there's definitely no reason to tell them to come to a daily call. That would be a waste of their time. In that case, if they're managing 1 or 2 clients, just do a weekly call and that's it. Now, if they're already at a point where they're managing 4 or 5 clients with you, then in that case, it makes sense to do calls 2-3 times a week, maybe even daily team calls. And I always suggest having daily team calls with anyone who's full-time in your company, because it helps create and solidify the culture of your team. Even if it's just a quick half-hour daily call, it's great for team culture and I highly recommend it. Now, when it comes to communication, the best practice is to have internal channels where you communicate directly with your contractors without the client seeing it. This way, you can discuss strategies, issues, solutions, etc. All of that without the client being a part of the conversation. Now, the thing that I highly suggest you implement here is what I call EODs. And that just means end of day reports. An end of day report is a very simple message that can be sent inside of Flowsy, Slack, WhatsApp, whatever you decide to use, simply stating whatever they did that day. So for example, let's say they do brand design. An end of day message for them might look like this. I designed the logo for client X. I selected the font for client Y's brand identity. I finalized the color palette of client Z's website, and I started designing the homepage for client X. Or if you're working with a copywriter, for example, it would go something like this. I wrote the 3 emails for the welcome email sequence for client X. I edited the landing page copy for client Y, and I created 3 new ad angles for client Z. It's as simple as that. This way, you'll always know exactly what each contractor is working on, and you know that they're on the ball with everything. For services that require more upkeep, like media buying and paid ads, for example, sometimes I implement both EOD reports as well as BOD reports. So I know exactly what the metrics for clients look like at the beginning of the day, as well as the end of the day. So let's say a media buyer is taking care of Facebook ads for 3 different e-commerce stores, an EOD report for them would look something like this. Client 1 has spent $2,374 today. We generated 50 sales. The revenue generated was $8,750. We have a ROAS of 3.7x. The profit margin is 65%. The net revenue is $5,687. And the net profit is $3,313. So the total ROI is 2.4x. So basically how much they've spent on ads so far in the day, how many sales that client has generated, how much revenue that amount of sales translates to, and what the return on ad spend is on that, which is basically the revenue generated divided by the total ad spend. And then the profit margin, which you have to check with the client, but obviously that's going to stay the same every day. You just keep it there to use it for the calculation of profits. Then net revenue, which is basically the revenue times their profit margin, that's how much they make after the cost of goods. And then if you just take the net revenue and subtract the ad spend from it, you're going to get the actual profit you put in their pocket after detracting all costs associated with running their store. And that, my friend, is the net profit. Finally, you divide the total net revenue by the amount spent and you get their final return on investment. In this case, for this specific client, for every single dollar he invests into ads, he's making $2.4 back of pure profit that goes straight into his pocket after deducting all the costs. And then, of course, the contractor would send a report like that for every single client that he manages in your agency. And the reason I make my contractors go through this exercise of sending EOD reports with all the client numbers is because, especially for a service like media buying, which is a very high maintenance service, it's important to go over the client's numbers every single day. So by sending these EODs, you create in your contractors the habit of always being on top of the numbers. And then in the case of something looking off on a specific day, they will notice it right away and they're going to take action as fast as humanly possible to fix it. Also, when you look at a report like that every single day, it's very easy to know how well each client of yours is performing. Obviously, something like that is not necessary if you're doing something like video editing, web design, web development, etc. But for services like sales, appointment setting, paid ads, conversion rate optimization, or any type of service where you're responsible for measurable results, it's important to establish those KPIs and look at them daily to always be on top of clients' health and see what can be improved. And then at the end of every week, I recommend having a call where you go over all of the EOD reports of the week with your contractors to see what's the current progress on all of the projects that they're managing or working on. Quite simply, I call these weekly reviews. They really help you with keeping up to date with everything that's happening on the service delivery side of things and helping you plan for the week ahead. You can do that on team calls so everyone is on the same page with everything that's going on in their departments. I also recommend every week or every 2 weeks having one-on-ones with every single contractor you have to get a pulse on how they're performing, and also just as a human to see how they're feeling mentally and to check if there's anything that they need to talk to you about. Now, when you follow all of the steps that I have laid down in this class, you're going to be able to have the ultimate drop servicing experience, and you're going to be able to get all of your service delivery taken care of by an experienced contractor without having any financial risk on your end. So with all of that being said, it's now time for you to start finding your first contractor. I want to let you know that it might be a little bit of a nerve-wracking experience at first if you've never worked with any contractors before, but that's totally fine. You're gonna get used to it in no time. And remember, when setting your deals exactly as I explained here, you literally run no financial risk on your end because you only ever need to pay these contractors after you've already gotten paid by your clients. So there's nothing to be afraid of here. We are using arbitrage to our benefit in the exact same way the 9-figure and even billion-dollar firms and marketing agencies out there do as well. Except we're not hiring overpaid people with marketing degrees that mean nothing in New York. We're hiring top talent from all over the world that actually have the experience needed to deliver on the service. So with all that being said, go out there. I'm so excited for you to experience this firsthand. And on that note, I hope you enjoyed today's module, and I'll see you in the next one.